Thank you, Chandler. Can everyone hear me? I just want to say a very big thank you to Chandler and the Chandler Project and all the sponsors of this event. It is so incredible for parents like me to have the opportunity to ask these unfiltered questions about the treatments, so we can get all the answers we need to make the best decisions that we can. And so this conference is really an incredible opportunity. So thank you for having me. And I'm especially excited that this year is the first ever Hypochondroplasia dedicated day. Sometimes it feels like hypochondroplasia is a little underrepresented as a form of skeletal dysplasia. So it's really wonderful that this year it's a highlight, and I feel very honored to have the opportunity to speak here today and tell my story. Let's see if I can change the slides. There we go. Okay, so first I'm going to talk about my family's journey so far. Since my son is 2 years old, that's why I put so far, because we still got a lot left of our journey. And then I'll get into some unmet psychosocial and clinical needs. And I do want to say that I am here, I'm not represented by any companies, and all the views expressed in this presentation are my own only. So these are my perceived unmet needs in the community. First, I want to introduce my family. My name is Alex, and I have a Ph.D. in neuroscience, biomedical sciences, and I work as a medical writer. This means I do content development, and I do scientific publications. My husband, his name is Colin, and he's a digital consultant. And my daughter, Stella, is 4 years old. She's an amazing big sister, and she loves princesses and dancing. And she's also a big Taylor Swift fan. I know Chandler would appreciate that. My son, Hudson, we call him Huddy, and he's going to be 2 years old in about a week and a half. And he loves cars and animals, and he loves saying bye to everybody. He's just Mr. Friendly, and he's living with hypochondroplasia. So what is hypochondroplasia? It's a type of skeletal dysplasia that's caused by a change in a gene called FGFR3, and that gene is involved in bone growth. So a change in the gene causes the bone growth to slow down. And hypochondroplasia is similar to achondroplasia, but the physical features are typically less pronounced, and the clinical symptoms are typically less severe. And it's thought to occur in 1 in 15,000 to 40,000 live births. That said, since sometimes the final height overlaps with the lower end of the average height population, a lot of times these diagnoses are missed. So I think it's definitely underdiagnosed. So I'm not quite sure if that number right here is super accurate. Most children with hypochondroplasia are born to average height parents. And this is the case with my family. My husband and I, we do not have short stature, and we don't have a family history that we know of. And the final adult height for men is 4 feet and 6 inches to 5 foot 5. And for women, it's 4 feet 2 inches to 4'11". And some of the physical characteristics that can be seen in hypochondroplasia include a large head, short stature and a stocky build, and a curved spine, short arms and legs. And this is the part of the arms and the legs that are closer to the body. And there's typically limited flexibility in the elbows, so they have limited reach. And short, broad hands and feet. Now, I want to point out that the short, broad hands and feet, they're typically not in the trident shape that's seen in achondroplasia. So that's one of the differentiating factors. And bowed legs. And these typically get worse as the child learns to stand. And we have seen this in Hudson. His bowed legs have definitely started to become more pronounced. What are some potential medical challenges in children with hypochondroplasia? Now, you'll notice that some, but not all of these, overlap with achondroplasia. So first, we have sleep apnea, which can be central or obstructive, meaning caused by a blockage in the upper airway or caused by the brain. in the opposite order. And we also have limited elbow extension, generalized mildly loose joints, sweating, gross and fine motor dysfunction. And then some of the features that are unique to hypochondroplasia, sorry about that, are seizures and mild to moderate intellectual disability, learning disabilities, and narrowing at the base of the skull, which is not unique to hypo, but it's less common in hypo. And some of the other features are curved spine, skin discoloration in the body folds or creases, and bowed legs. Now I'd like to share a little bit about our journey so far. So we first found out that Hudson had a large head at the 21-week anatomy scan. But we didn't think anything of it at that time because large heads run in our family. And so, it just doesn't seem anything abnormal. He was in a breech position and the ultrasound tech had a hard time getting certain measurements. And they asked me to come back for a follow-up ultrasound. And they still were not able to get these measurements. And so they asked me to come back again. And he still had a large head. It was in about the 98th percentile. But at that time, they noticed that his femurs were measuring short. So they were still unable to get his lower spine measurement. So I came back again. So typically, these diagnoses can go unnoticed during pregnancy, but I happened to have follow-up ultrasounds just because they weren't getting these measurements. So that's when they noticed at the 30-week level 2 ultrasound that his head was measuring large and he had short long bones. But at that time, the short long bones, they actually fell off the growth curve. So they said, hey, you can meet with a genetic counselor to discuss genetic testing. So this was a very difficult decision because, the thought of putting a needle into my very pregnant belly at that time was terrifying to me. It made me very squeamish, but I decided to go forward with it because I figured that having an answer and having a diagnosis before birth would help me make the best decisions to ensure that we had the best care possible and that we were able to ensure our safety. So I did do the amniocentesis at 33 weeks, and we did the skeletal dysplasia panel, which came back with a diagnosis of hypochondroplasia at 36 weeks of pregnancy. At that time, I met with a genetic counselor, a clinical geneticist, OBGYN. We talked about a birth plan. We talked about what our plans were. They advised me to deliver at a hospital that had a NICU and that would be able to take care of critical care if needed. I elected to do a planned C-section, and that's because Hudson was in a breech position, and he has a large head. So I was able to better make a decision that I wanted to do the C-section just based on the fact that these two factors combined. Sorry, I need to get a sip of water. Now, when I got the diagnosis, I felt a little scared and unsure. And, the questions about what will my child's life be like? And will they have, will they have the experiences that an average height child will have? They all were flooding my brain. And then I learned that there are medical challenges associated with hypochondroplasia. So these are some of the ones that we dealt with Hudson. So he has breathing problems and feeding related problems that consisted of reflux, weak oral muscles, and the food would go into his windpipe. And he had delayed independent feeding. So he wasn't able to feed himself as quickly as other children. He has bowed legs and ear-related problems, speech, sweating, and motor-related problems. And I'm going to discuss some of these in more detail. So first, we have the breathing problems. At 5 days old, Hudson, I was feeding him, and I noticed that his lips looked a little bit blue. And I asked my husband, do his lips look blue? And then at that time, his whole body turned blue. So we started doing CPR. All I was doing was it was after feeding, and I was just holding him. So thankfully, my husband and I knew what to do because we had taken a CPR class. and he made a full recovery at the hospital. But he was diagnosed with a floppy airway due to reflux, a floppy airway and then closing of the windpipe due to reflux, so the food coming back up. And we were advised to take additional measures to reduce reflux. And so then we underwent the sleep study at about 1 month old, and he showed that he had 64 apnea episodes per hour. So he would stop breathing for longer than 10 seconds at a time, 64 times an hour. I'm sure you can imagine how terrifying that is as a parent when you get told, oh, hypochondroplasia, it's a mild form of skeletal dysplasia. And then you're like, wow, my child is not breathing for 64 times an hour. So we then did the MRI. It showed no narrowing at the base of the skull or increased pressure in the brain. So the breathing problems were caused by an obstruction of his airway, not by his brain. He was prescribed oxygen therapy, and we took that home, and he was on it 24/7. Now, getting him on oxygen therapy was a whole twist in our lives that we didn't see coming. We had to learn a lot of things. We had to learn how to use the equipment. We had less independence because we had to plan everything before we left the house. How much oxygen is in this tank? Where are we going to put the pulse oximeter in the stroller when we're walking around? All these things, how are we going to train the daycare providers on how to use the equipment? Just so much to learn. And as a parent of a young child, that's a chaotic time anyway. And to add all of this new equipment and everything on top of that, it was incredibly overwhelming. But we got there, we finally learned how to use everything, and we became pros at it. Now, he had a repeat sleep study at 2 months old, and he improved a lot in his sleep apnea. As you can see on the chart on the left, he went from 64 episodes an hour to 8.2 episodes an hour. So this was really wonderful, and they cleared him to only use the oxygen therapy during sleep. Now, he still had apnea at that time, so he still was having breathing problems, but he didn't need the oxygen therapy around the clock like he did before. Then we repeated the sleep study at 10 months old, and things were about the same. He had his adenoids removed at 17 months old, and the goal of that procedure was to open his airway further so he could breathe better. And that seemed to help a lot, because when we did the sleep study again at 19 months old, he improved to 3.4 episodes an hour. And his doctors felt that this was good enough that he didn't even need the oxygen therapy anymore. So they told us that he could come off of it at 20 months old. That was a huge relief for our family. We felt so free. It was really great. Now, he also has dealt with some hearing and speech related problems, and he has had chronic ear infections his whole life. And this led to a speech delay because the fluid buildup in his ears caused hearing problems, which affected his speech development. So he had ear tubes put in around 17 months old, and they really, really seemed to help him a lot. He's only had one ear infection since the procedure, and his speech is definitely progressing. It's still behind, and I think we're going to enroll him in speech therapy, but he's doing much better than he was. Now, here are some adaptations and accommodations that we needed to do. We needed to keep his head supported at all times, and that was to prevent his head from flopping forward, which could cause serious breathing problems. So we would always keep our hand behind his head or use a neck roll when he was in the car seat. We didn't put him in jumperoos or bouncers just to avoid any breathing problems. And we would always keep his back straight and supported, and that's to help prevent the development of kyphosis or curved spine, which can lead to medical problems later in life. So we would kind of do a little makeshift magazines behind his back to keep his back straight and supported. I will also note that he's not strapped in that picture, but that was just for the picture purposes only, so I could see his outfit, but he was always strapped in when he was in his bouncer. And a high chair with a straight back. We did not put him in any seats with soft backs with C-shaped curves, to help prevent curving of the spine. We also needed to do some clothing adaptations, and we use a lot of bamboo viscose fabric, which has been a life-changing thing for him. He sweats a lot, and the bamboo viscose is very breathable and helps keep him comfortable. And I actually also learned how to shorten pants and sleeves using a sewing machine. And there was a very, very kind woman in my community who offered to come over for 4 weeks in a row and just teach me how to use a sewing machine. Her daughter, who is 30 years old now, also has short stature. So it was a very full circle moment of relying upon the community to learn about this thing that could help my son. Hudson is doing so much better now. He's about to be 2 years old. He's older, stronger, and thriving. As you can see, he's such a happy kid. He loves trucks. He just loves to smile and laugh. And if you had asked me where Hudson would be in 2 years, I would have not expected that he was going to be doing this well, based on where we all started. It was a rough journey the first year or so, but now that he's bigger and stronger, it makes me realize that everything was all worth it. That, you know, we went through the hard time, but he's doing really, really great. Now, based on the fact that there's not a lot of information about hypochondroplasia out there, I've really made it a goal of mine to advocate and educate others about this condition. So I've done some podcasts, including On Rare by Bridge Bio, and I actually created an Instagram account. So I make little videos about this, like when is he achieving certain developmental milestones, and how to put on the oxygen therapy on, or actually the cannula on his face. So just different things like that. And he's actually done a little bit of modeling as well. Since we're so passionate about the bamboo viscose being so helpful with his sweating, he did some modeling for Kite Baby, which is a wonderful brand that has really been supportive in increasing the representation of a child with dwarfism in their modeling. It's not that often that you see children with skeletal dysplasia as models for clothing brands. And, you know, it just is so empowering to have the opportunity to be featured on their website. And now I'll get into some unmet psychosocial and clinical needs. So, all right. There are definitely too few resources to educate families about hypochondroplasia. When we first got the diagnosis, I did a Google search and I could not find anything. And keep in mind, I have a PhD, I'm a medical writer. I should be able to find the resources. And there's just not that much out there. And so this is a problem because it's confusing and concerning for parents. They want to know about hypochondroplasia specifically. And so what I think is more hypochondroplasia specific developmental resources could be really great for educating families about the unique clinical and psychosocial aspects of hypochondroplasia. And this will help eliminate confusion and provide support. And it'll help parents understand their child's condition so they can advocate for them better. And I did include a QR code for Dr. Bober's review, it's been a really helpful publication for my family. It's one of the very few published resources out there. So I've read that a lot. So another issue is that hypochondroplasia is not treated as a distinct clinical condition. It's often referred to as achondroplasia, but milder, but it's not that simple. Currently, there's no hypochondroplasia-specific clinical guidelines. So it's treated based on the achondroplasia guidelines. And this is a problem because treating your child based on the guidelines for a different condition can cause the failure to diagnose problems that are very specific to hypochondroplasia, like the brain differences and seizures and cognitive abnormalities that are not seen in achondroplasia. And if providers don't know to look out for these things, then they might get missed. And it causes unnecessary worry in parents about the likelihood and severity of certain medical problems because certain problems are more severe or frequent in achondroplasia. And then the parents think that they're going to be more likely to happen in their hypochondroplasia child because those are the guidelines that are being used to treat. And there's a lot of confusion about when developmental milestones will be reached. You're looking at the timeline of milestones for children with achondroplasia, and the providers say, oh, it's just that, but faster. And what does that mean? So I think it would be really, really helpful to create hypochondroplasia-specific guidelines and to focus on hypo as its own condition at conferences and in patient resources, and to stop referring to it as just a mild form of achondroplasia. Um, and this will help improve the detection of medical problems that are more common in hypo and to help eliminate confusion about what to expect. And it could maybe eventually potentially eliminate the unnecessary medical tests. If certain things are not as common in hypo, then maybe there's not a need to test for them. Now, another thing is there's no there were recently published hypochondroplasia specific growth charts. Not a lot of providers are aware of them. And they're not in the electronic medical records for a lot of networks. So the growth in children with hypochondroplasia is often tracked using the achondroplasia or average height growth charts. And this is a problem because it's not leading to accurate tracking of their growth. And there's no knowledge about how the child's height, weight, and head circumference compare to other children of the same age with hypochondroplasia. So parents and families also might perceive this, that the hypochondroplasia specific guidelines aren't important enough to include in the electronic medical record. And it's like, what message is that sending to these families? So I think that it would be good to educate providers about the existence of these newly published growth charts and to print the charts and bring them to their appointments, which I've QR code here for, and ask your child's provider about maybe the hospital network adding these charts to the electronic medical record. And just, trying to get that in motion. I think that would be beneficial for both providers and families. This would lead to accurate growth tracking and potential early identification of medical problems in children with hypochondroplasia. Now, here's a psychosocial issue that people with hypochondroplasia might face. So since the stature of many people with hypochondroplasia falls in the middle between achondroplasia and average height population, this can cause a feeling of in-betweenness. And yes, there are some overlap with these populations, as you can see on the chart. But for the most part, a lot of these people with hypochondroplasia are taller with those with achondroplasia, but shorter than those with average height. And some people with hypochondroplasia might not feel accepted by either group, and they might experience feelings of isolation because of this. So I think something that can be done to help is developing resources to address the unique psychosocial experience in people with hypochondroplasia and really focusing more on hypochondroplasia at conferences to help people with this condition feel accepted by the skeletal dysplasia community. And thank you to Chandler for getting the ball rolling in this sense. It's really amazing to finally start to have more of a focus and more of a light shed on this condition that's often overlooked. Now, there are no approved treatments for hypochondroplasia, and there's a lot of research and clinical trials that are being conducted to find safe and effective ways to help people living with hypochondroplasia. And I'm very excited about all of the trials that are being, kickstarted right now. It's really, really an exciting time. And these treatments might help alleviate the physical, cognitive, and psychosocial challenges associated with hypochondroplasia. It's much more than treating the height. It's treating the quality of life. It's treating the psychosocial, mental health, and treating the cognitive challenges, hopefully. There's a need for treatment, and there's a need for treatment options. Maybe a certain treatment will work better on certain symptoms or work better for a certain individual. So thank you to everyone in this room who's doing their part in making this a reality for people like my family and I. All right, so in summary, the first year or so with Hudson was very difficult, but he's gotten bigger and stronger and is really, really doing great. And he's just such an important part of my family's life and just a happy kid. And I will say that when I was putting the slides together, I nearly teared up when I saw this glow up, because just thinking about where we started, how he was so fragile and underweight and delicate, and we were scared that he would stop breathing at any moment. And now just thinking about how he's just like any other kid. He's got some motor challenges, but he is such a hoot and so much fun to be around, such a big part of our lives. And I think that the fixes, the unmet psychosocial and clinical needs, I think these are totally attainable fixes. Some of the resources could be developed to educate families. I think that's an easy fix. We can totally do that. And then hypochondroplasia not being treated as just a milder form of achondroplasia, this will be an effort to educate providers and educate families to really start thinking about it as its own condition. And there's a need for resources addressing the unique psychosocial experience of people with hypochondroplasia. When they go to these conferences and these events, they won't feel like the in between. They'll feel like, or when they go to school, they won't feel like they don't fit in. This community outreach and just education is so helpful with just the perception and the acceptance of people with this condition. And there's a need for safe, effective, accessible, and affordable. I know that's a big laundry list of, the perfect ideal, but treatments for people living with hypochondroplasia. And I just want to say thank you again to everyone in the room who's doing their part to, help people like my family, because, it's not just helping this generation, it's helping future generations. And as, the sciencey people here understand that these conditions are inherited in autosomal dominant form. So there's a good chance that if Hudson decides to have children, that his child will have hypochondroplasia. And so this is helping not just my child, but maybe my grandchildren if I have them someday, and future generations. So it's really making the world a better place to be able to create resources and develop treatments to help these people. Thank you so much for listening today. And I've also attached a QR code for my family's Instagram if you'd like to follow along on Huddy's journey. Thank you.
The skin discoloration in white folds and creases that you mentioned, are there more documented cases of the Japanese boy with the K650T mutation?
I think that's a question for Dr. Dauber.